Hey Drew, I was just going to go over how you might go about making your t-shirt design or I guess your logo design for Alex. So, logo design files, you can make them relatively small, like 3x3 or 5x5 is good. Actually, probably 3x3 is probably more appropriate for a logo file. Make sure it's in CMYK color mode. Make sure this is in high resolution. You shouldn't need to do any bleeds or anything like that, so we just create this document. So I'm in Window, Workspace, Essentials Classic. So I'm in Essentials Classic. Just make sure the Properties panel is open. A good place to start is just with black with your first version of the logo, and then you can save out a different file and add color to that. So start with the black and white one first. So if we do a file place, we can actually bring in a sketch. I'm not quite sure where mine's at. I'm going to find it. Okay, so I found it, and so we can just place that in. If we just click and drag it in, just hold down, you can click and drag it in at the size you want to bring it in. And so if you just click one time, it'll bring it in at the full size, and sometimes it's huge. So if you just click and drag it in, that works pretty well. So if we go to the Layers panel, we can create another layer on top of our sketch, and we can actually lock the sketch down. Maybe I don't know if it really matters, but I'll put it in the center of the canvas, I'll lock it down, and then I'm going to be working in layer 2, so I'll highlight layer 2. So one kind of nice brush or tool to use is the Blob brush tool. If you expand your toolbar and come down here, hold down on the paintbrush tool, you'll find the Blob brush tool there. And so I think the Blob brush tool works it's actually not a stroke, it's actually a filled in shape when you work with the Blob brush. So the fill color is going to be the color that it comes out. So just ignore the stroke, just have that apply none on there. But this will be the color that you're going to be working with. And since we want to start with black, I would say keep it on black. If you want to change the size, just double click on it. And you can also make it like really smooth, so it will smooth out every line that you make, or you can make it more close to like the roughness of the line that you're actually drawing. You can change the size here. I haven't messed with the angle or the roundness, but you can try messing with those if you want. I'm going to have mine kind of smooth, but not too all the way up, maybe. And you can see what that does when I draw a line, it just smooths it out. So if I don't have that on there, it's not going to look nearly as smooth. I suggest having a little bit of smoothness to your line. And I'm going to double click on this again and just make sure, okay, I have it on 1 point. So you can actually go in on your drawing that you do and just trace over it. Now on my Montana Style Events logo that I ended up doing, I did this with the buffalo skull, and I created all the shapes, and I did the vines and stuff. It's actually like a rose bush thing. And I found that the buffalo skull didn't turn out as good as the rose bushes did. So I ended up deleting my hand-drawn buffalo skull and just sticking with the rose bush graphics that I made with this technique. Because I thought that the rose bushes looked better with that hand-drawn aesthetic, but for some reason, like, the buffalo skull just wasn't as successful. So, and this is really rudimentary. I'm doing this really fast. Like, when I actually did this myself, I didn't go this quickly. I actually took my time a little bit more, but just for the sake of this demo, I'll show you kind of the process that I took. So we can actually use the Live Paint Bucket tool now. So if you click on this, it's under the Shape Builder tool. So just go to the Live Paint Bucket tool. Pretend I didn't have that in there. So you can actually go to the Live Paint Bucket tool and you can change the color if you want, and you can click into the different shapes that you've created. Of course, if you're starting with a black and white, if you're making a logo, you need to start with black and white. So using color at this stage is probably not the best idea. You're just going to want to create a logo with black and white. So maybe I want to fill in some white shapes here, so just go through and do that. This might need to be like... So you can use the direct selection tool, which is the white arrow tool, to grab individual shapes instead of the whole thing. And I can send this to back. What happened to my little lines? Oh, they're still in there. They must have turned white, maybe. So getting those selected might be kind of tricky, but you can also ungroup with, so if you grab this with the black arrow tool, you can ungroup things. Let's see. Okay, that was behind. So I had to do, I do Shift Command right bracket, which is kind of next to the delete key. It'll bring everything to the front. It's the shortcut command for bring to front. For some reason it wasn't showing up in the properties panel. You can also do object arrange bring to front, but this is the shortcut command for it. So that was behind my white shape. So that's kind of how I went about doing it, and I would say just work with black and white. Also with a logo, you might want to make sure that your black that you're using is one color black. Oops. So if I go into like this shape here, double click on that, it is one color black. Sometimes you might get a black that looks like this. That's 4-color black. It's called a rich black, and it does print nicely like on magazines and different formats, but like if you were to print like a newsprint ad with that, it would get really blurry because it stacks so many colors on top of each other from the printer that it'll bleed through the paper and become blurry. So it's nice to just use a 1-color black, 100% K for your black in your logo. And if you need to make a 100% K swatch, you can do that. Since I already went in and made that 100%, you can just add the 100% K swatch in here, which I think by default this black here is 100% K, but if you want to make sure to make your own mix of 100% K black, you can make it over here quickly by double clicking, changing it, pushing OK, and then just dragging it over into your swatches panel. And then when you're going through, you can quickly select that as all of your blacks. Oops, in your document. So anyway, so that's kind of how I went about doing that. I used a combination of the Blob brush tool and the live paint bucket tool. You might have to kind of mess around with the live paint bucket tool to get it to work at first and figuring out the fill color and stuff, but it really is a nice tool for creating kind of a hand-drawn sort of look with digital. You can also just take a drawing that you did and do an image trace to it. I tried doing an image trace to this drawing and it just didn't work. Oops, Kanzi. I'm going to group these things together using the panel over here and move it off to the side. But one thing about this is that it wouldn't trace, but I can show you quickly how you might do an image trace. So I can select that. There's actually an image trace panel, which is actually a little bit better than the image trace up here, because you can change the threshold here. You can do a preview, and this one doesn't trace very well. That's why I didn't trace it. But you can customize it with this threshold here if you're doing black and white. If you do color, you can customize the amount of colors that you do. The maximum is 30, but you can dumb it down to like 3 colors or 4 colors if you want, depending on the type of trace that you're doing. You can change some of this advanced stuff. I usually don't mess with this too much, but you can definitely change it and see what it does to your result. And then you just push trace when you're done. So like, let's say you did a pen and ink drawing, maybe you want to do it like this, an image trace, instead of using the blob brush and the paintbrush or paint bucket tool. And then you always have to push expand when you do an image trace at the end. So it's a 2-part process. You have to use the image trace button or the image trace panel that I just pulled up. And then, when you're done, you might want to X out of it, but then you have to push expand too, which will be a button up here if you're in Essentials Classic. So you'll have to expand it, but you can see it's all vector now. There's all these little anchor points. And now, the nice thing about the vector is that you can make this as big as you want, and it's never going to get pixelated because it's not pixel-based, it's vector-based. And that's why we make logos in Illustrator. That actually didn't do a terrible job of tracing it. So another thing, too, about this, maybe I'll just Command-Z this, is that when you make a logo, you want to, say this is done, say this is all I did. Obviously, you're probably going to have some sort of symbol and then some sort of logo text. So whenever you get this kind of dialed in, looking the way you want it to with the symbol and the text together, make sure that you select that text and go to Type, Create Outlines, right here. And, before you do that, you might actually want to do a Command-C, Command-V, bring that off into the gray area, and then do Object, or Type, Create Outlines, and then outline your text so that when people open your logo file, they're not missing your text. Because if I'm missing your text and you share an AI file with me, then this will turn up pink, and I won't be able to see what your actual logo looks like because I will be missing your font. But in order to get around that, you just outline the fonts. So definitely when you're done with your logo design and you get the logo text looking the way you want it to, make sure to go to Type, Create Outlines on all of the text. And you can keep the actual editable text over here in the margin. If you ever in the future need to go in and edit it, it'll be here, and then you can just bring it back in and re-outline it just for reference. But just remember to do that. And then when you file, save this file, go to your documents, create your new folder. We'll name this logo, and then create let's do logo BW. So we definitely want to label our files if they are black and white. We can create a new folder within the logo folder called CMYK. So this will be for print, and then we'll back out of here, get back into the logo file, and we'll make another one called RGB, and this will be for screen. And then we'll back out again. So inside of our logo file, we have RGB and CMYK. Since we are first working on the CMYK version, we'll go into the CMYK folder, and we'll name this, an appropriate name, probably Alex Billmeyer logo BW for the AI file. Save that. Okay. And then when we do a file save as, we can actually, once we get that black and white one dialed in, we'll do a file save as and do logo CMYK. We'll start on that CMYK version of our logo, and this is where we can start adding color to the logo. Say that we want to make, the horns orange or whatever, or red, or, and this is my color version of my logo, Command S. So then I have an AI file for the CMYK and the black and white. Make sure to not save over the black and white version when you save out your color version. Make sure your text is outlined. Make sure all your shapes are as clean as possible so you're not having a ton of different weird shapes overlapping each other. It needs to be fairly clean. And I'll look at your file at the end to make sure that it is. I'm trying to think if there's anything else I should tell you. I guess typically with this too, that one thing you might do is you might do file save as and save out an EPS. Make sure to check use artboards so that you only save out the artboard and not anything off in the margin. And this is the CMYK one, so we'll do an EPS file. So typically with logos, you'll save out like 3 different file types, like an AI, EPS, JPEG. That would be for CMYK, and then you might actually go in and save out RGB files, such as like PNG is usually what people use for RGB. So you might save out a PNG file of the black and white and the color version in the RGB folder as a PNG file. So there's going to be different file types, and you might need to check in with me and ask me what file types I want of each of your black and white and color logo. But that's about all I wanted to go over with you, just how to set up the file, how to do it.